pretty much have to go into a discomfort pit, or he labelled it the pit of discomfort. You go into that for a while because it's just so alien from what you're used to doing. So if you're making a change, unless you go into that pit of discomfort, you might not actually be making any sort of change at all, because it's the change that's the uncomfortableness. Because you're basically setting whole new neural pathways, you're accessing new muscles and different timing sequences than you've ever used before.
Welcome to the Effortless Swimming Podcast, the show that helps swimmers and triathletes love the water, become a better swimmer, and live a better life. Here's your host, Brenton Ford.
Welcome to the Effortless Swimming Podcast. My guest today is Garry Hurring, who's a former Olympic swimmer and Olympic coach from New Zealand. Garry, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brenton. Nice to be here.
Well, we just got back, about a month ago from Thailand. We had our Hell Week camps over there, and that was the first Hell Week camp that you'd attended. You'd previously come to the Hawaii camps, but it was the first Hell Week camps. And what was your experience over there coaching some of the athletes that we had over there at Hell Week?
I think the standout experience was how amazing the facilities were there. It was such an incredible environment for the athletes to come along and spend a week with the 50-metre pool and the accommodation and the restaurant looking over the pool and all the sports facilities there. It was just sort of a perfect environment for a training camp. The athletes themselves, we had the two groups come in and they were all quite different. So there was a lot of individual things that sort of I picked up from those swimmers, but just in general, the thing that sort of blew me away from my first experience over in Thailand was that it was just the whole Thanyapura sports facility. It was amazing.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have that somewhat close by to Australia and New Zealand, and just to be able to use that facility. I remember 5 years ago when a friend of mine was working there, and he said, "Oh, you should bring a group of swimmers over and bring them over for a camp." And I originally thought, I don't know who's going to want to come over and do a camp with me, but I'll put it out there, open it up, and see if anyone wants to come. And it's really become one of the things I really look forward to each year when we run these camps in October. And the facilities, as you said, are just so perfect with everything on site. Everything's taken care of, and you can really you can train, you can eat without having to worry about cooking or anything. You can sleep, rest, recover, and really just enjoy yourself. So we're so lucky to have that facility there. And this podcast, what I want to sort of focus in on is talking about some examples from Hell Week with swimmers who were able to make some really significant changes to their stroke and to their speed over the course of those 7 days, and how someone listening to this podcast could potentially make those changes in their own stroke by applying some of the things that we went through at Hell Week. And you work primarily probably with the slower lanes there in Thailand. And you mentioned before the call that there was a couple of common themes that you saw there with those swimmers. So do you want to touch on what some of those common themes were with their technique and how you went about making those changes to their stroke?
Yeah, sure. There was two to three things that really did prevail with the swimmers over in the slower lanes that I was working with predominantly. Often the first things that I'm trying to identify, just to try and get an overview of the person and see if we can work on the biggest things that I see. And, the terminology that comes to mind is to work on the big rocks as a theory of trying to get the big stuff right first, and then sort of working your way down to the little rocks and working on the smaller, more details of technique. But I would always look for body positioning or the ability for the so-called performance platform of the body and how it looked in the water, whether the hips were high enough, whether there was back arch, whether there was head positioning issues, often through breathing. And other things that sort of stood out in the body positioning area were the sometimes excessive kicking for the speed that was being generated. So often if you'll see a swimmer that's kicking too hard when they're actually just swimming at an aerobic pace, it would indicate to me that they're kicking in order to keep lift rather than to actually get any propulsion out of it. And if you can then work on a body position that can help generate its own lift, then that kicking can go away and thus save an awful lot of energy. As we all know how puffed we get when we swim, when we kick very hard. So those were often just big indicators that would sort of red flag something else that was going on in the swimmer, and I'd then sort of try and rectify that body position, and however we could do that in a number of ways. The other things that stood out were quite often I would see the swimmers reaching forward too much on their catch. So they were catching in quite a shallow position and thus missing out on leverage that they could generate by generally trying to get a deeper catch and potentially maybe a slightly but more rhythmic stroke rather than the just trying to reach and all about distance per stroke. Sometimes the concept of distance per stroke is not about reaching forward as far as you can with your hands, but getting down and getting leverage will then allow you more power to pull yourself better through the water, and that's how you're getting your distance per stroke. So sometimes just reaching forward with the hand can be quite just a subconscious way that people think they're getting distance, but they're actually not.
There's so much subtlety and nuance to that sort of stuff too, isn't there? Like when we work on the catch in the pool, like there's a lot of swimmers who go too deep with their arms and they're very straight, but then there's also swimmers who are way too shallow to be able to get any of that leverage that you're talking about. And so that's why I think it's it really comes down to the individual. Like there's no advice that's going to fit for everyone, because there's all these little nuances to the things that people are doing, and it just depends on what it is for that individual.
Yeah, that's so true, and you were absolutely right. Some of the swimmers were just driving down too deeply and not getting any sort of leverage on their catch at all. So very much an individual area of the stroke. Quite often when I first look at a swim, I try and sort of ignore the wood for the trees, if you know what I mean, and just sort of almost blur my eyes and see if I can see something standing out with that swimmer, and often it's a little bit different per swimmer, and quite often swimmers over time, they don't realise it, but it's the hard stroke that's often the best stroke. So it's the stroke that's making them tired, and they don't realise that they're actually subconsciously letting that hard stroke go. Because they're doing quite a few laps and it's tiring to do it that way, they will, as I said, subconsciously, they're not aware of it, they'll actually let go of the water a little bit and find an easier way to rotate through the water. So, sometimes it's about bringing the swimmer back to that awareness of actually grabbing the water and working with the stroke that maybe is not such a pleasant stroke to work with, but until you can develop it and get stronger with it.
Yeah, and I really like, in reference to that hard stroke, it's not the stroke that's where you're pulling as hard as you possibly can, but it's the stroke that might be quite tiring as you're pulling through, because you're holding a lot more water than what you were before. And one of the things that really resonated, I think, with the people at Hell Week, you were talking about different gears. So imagine I might actually let you explain it, but the reference or the analogy of using different gears and where you should probably spend most of your time training in the bigger gear, and then when it comes to racing, it makes the lower gears a lot easier to kind of settle into. So can you explain the reference to the gears, because that helped a lot of swimmers on camp?
Yeah, sure. It was a concept that I didn't come up with. I first heard of it from a famous American coach called David Sarlo, and he talked with his swimmers, several of his swimmers I've worked with in the New Zealand swim team, and they've really relayed. Plus, he's talked to me about it, the gear system. It's just a really simplified way of looking at the power of a stroke, and he talks about 5 gears. He will talk about that as a training intensity issue as well. He'll tell swimmers, I want this set to be done in 5th gear, or I want this set to be done in 3rd gear, and so it sort of relates not only to stroke, but in amounts of work or energy that you're using up in the pool. But 5th gear, obviously, in terms of a bike or a car or something like that, is the big, strong cog that maybe takes a bit more power to get around. But once you get that gear moving, that's when you're really going to find your top speed. And as you can go down the gears, sometimes depending on distance, you want to try and find the right gear for the distance that you're working on. And it may be that if you're doing a long ocean swim, you might want to be settling into sort of a 3rd gear, third and a half, 4th gear, and just finding that efficiency and something that's quite fast, but it's strong. You've got good leverage and above all, you're getting decent speed without getting too tired. So there's sort of a rhythmic energy to that 3rd, 4th gear. And then you can, when you really want to sort of overtake or work to a finish of a race, or perhaps it's a shorter race, then you want a bit of power into that gear rating, so you might want to be able to chop up. But as a coach, I notice a lot of times swimmers find it difficult to change gears. So I think it's a important thing to be practicing and training is that concept of working through the gears. Some swimmers find it very, very difficult to do that, and they find that they get stuck in sort of those middle gears and they can't find a top gear or even a lower gear. So it is an interesting concept to work with.
Yeah, and I like the way that because we've got so much time there on camp. It's not like we're just doing an hour and a half session. It's 7 days of 2 sessions a day, and I think we're able to get people for those that were struggling with it, we're able to get them to have a pretty good sense of what they needed to do to be able to shift gears. Like we did quite a bit of stroke count work, like just some 50s where I think it might have been like 10 50s where we had them do minimum stroke count. But in that minimum stroke count, it's not like you're holding the glide for 2 or 3 seconds. It's just keep your normal rhythm going. But the way that you can reduce your stroke count is to either reduce the drag or increase the propulsion and in the effectiveness of your kick and your rotation and your catch and pull, and just getting them to practice that. And that's really kind of like that 5th gear where you're just looking to really maximize the distance per stroke. And then we did quite a bit of variable pace work. Like we did quite a few sets of 200s and 100s where we had them go sort of one easy, one medium, one fast, and just to be able and giving them their times as they went through it. And I found throughout the week, majority of the swimmers were getting a lot better at being able to shift those gears and change the speed as they went. Whereas there was probably half the swimmers, I'd say, at the start of the camp who, when they went to increase the speed, they didn't actually go any faster than the second one. And sometimes even the first one, like it all just sort of blended into one. And that's the ability to change the gears. But I found they really were able to improve that with with those different sets that we were doing. And I mean, we saw some pretty dramatic changes with particularly some of the swimmers in those slower lanes, where we had swimmers who started out around the sort of 230, 240 mark per 100. And then by the end of the camp, they were down to around that sort of 2-minute mark when they were really sort of pushing it. And what changes did you see happen for like those swimmers who were able to make such big improvements in such a short space of time?
Well, I think there's a range of things. It was sometimes we would just see those changes from fitness that the swimmers were getting through the week. You'd see them sort of often go on second and third day, they'd go through a bit of a tired patch, but before the end of the week, most of them were really breaking through, and you could see the fitness, especially doing all that long course 50-meter swimming outdoors. But technical changes, I'd like to think that they'd embraced the things we'd talked about, and that was the magic wand. Surely it is. At the end of the day, it's just that oftentimes it's quite. You can see, as you can see someone just instantly. It's a light bulb moment, and what you've discussed with them, that they've got straight away, and they're liking it straight away. But sometimes it's a 3, 4, 5 day process, and you'll often see them getting on to what you're talking about 3 days later. And I had several swimmers coming up and saying things like that. I've only just felt what you were talking about on Monday, sort of thing. So yeah, I think it is a whole range of those sorts of things, and just clicking, and I think one of the neat things we also did on camp was, because we had so many coaches, that everyone got analysed by everyone, and so I would have swimmers coming to me and saying something that you'd said to them really resonated, and then it helped them, and it sort of exemplified what I'd said or something Mitch had said. And I think that because we were all often on the same sort of wavelength, it just really helped the swimmers to get that reinforcement from different angles and spoken in different ways.
Yeah, that's one of the real benefits, I think, to being able to have so many coaches on camp. And that's what we've got 7 camps coming up next year, which I think you're doing 6 of. So you'll be at the Noosa camp in March, the 2 Hawaii camps in July, and then the Hell Week camps in October. And we've got minimum 3 coaches for each of those, but I think even 4 or 5 for some of the other camps. And the way that we sort of structure the weeks are, typically in the afternoons, we do sort of 2-on-1 coaching, where we do filming and you get to work really closely with each coach each day. And it's that, you're exactly right. It's like, so a lot of people come out to me and said, oh, this thing that Garry said, this made the difference. Or like an example that I had, one of the swimmers on camp, Kaz, she was having trouble basically with the exit of her stroke. She was too wide. And I think it was on the second day that we were doing the 2-on-1 coaching, Mitch had said to her, look, just imagine that you're coming into your opposite hip on your other side when you go to exit. And that's kind of the exaggeration she had to feel to fix her exit and get it in closer to her hip. And it was just that one idea that allowed her to make that change and just fix something that she'd been working on for a very long time. And it's just the different messages, same point, but different message. And sometimes different things will connect with different people. And that's what I really love, and I really want to make sure that people get that pretty much one-on-one coaching at the camp, and that's why I'm no longer running these camps by myself. I mean, 5 years ago when I ran the first Hell Week, it was me and about 20 swimmers, and that was way too much. And I don't even know if we did video analysis then, but now it's minimum three coaches, if not more. And geez, it makes such a difference with the improvement that people make, and certainly makes my job a lot easier as well, because it's nice to be able to let like you and Mitch and Phil just kind of do your thing, because you've been in this sport for so long and you know what you're doing, and it's just great to be able to just trust that you guys will, you've got the knowledge, you've got the coaching there, and you can just kind of do your thing, which is really, really good. And one of the things that I picked up from you, I think it was on the first podcast that we recorded, was the pit of discomfort, talking about the awkward and uncomfortable feeling that you're going to have when you're changing your stroke. And I relay that as much as I possibly can, because it's kind of, I think you put the wording to the thing that I knew was there, but I didn't have a great way of explaining it. And now I really preface camps and clinics with that pit of discomfort that you're going to go through. And for those people who haven't heard that before, could you explain what that is that people will experience when they're improving their stroke?
Yeah, well, again, not my concept. It was something I was taught to me on a coaching course, and it was very general. It's not just for swimming; it's for all sports. But it was a neurologist who talked about it, and just in terms of motor skill learning and neurally. And adapting to new techniques and new habit forming, and basically he said his concept was that you pretty much have to go into a discomfort pit, or he labelled it the pit of discomfort. You go into that for a while because it's just so alien from what you're used to doing. So if you're making a change, unless you go into that pit of discomfort, you might not actually be making any sort of change at all, because it's the change that's the uncomfortableness. Because you're basically setting whole new neural pathways, you're accessing new muscles and different timing sequences than you've ever used before. But if you think about it logically, that's how you make a new technique happen, and that's how through repetition, through that pit of discomfort, then you come out with a habit. And that's ideally what we all want, is good habits in the pool or any sort of physical activity that we're doing. We want those things to be able to happen naturally through repetition and practice. It's something that I really embrace myself whenever I'm doing any sort of sport or training. I always think that, that uncomfortable feeling is worth persevering through. Oftentimes if you know that the concept of what you're doing makes sense, and if you know that the way that you're doing it should make certain muscle groups feel tired or uncomfortable, or then you sort of embrace those specific uncomfortableness feelings, and you work with them, and you sort of bring them aboard as part of your routine, and generally the pit is just a pit. You'll generally come out the other end and feel way better because of it at some point, but there's often just that awkward period when you're making change. That's pretty much what the pit's all about.
And I want to talk about the connectedness in the stroke. One of the swimmers that we had was having trouble with keeping his arm out in front while he was getting the breath. So his arm that was in front kept dropping down, elbow was dropped, and he just couldn't keep it out there and really get the timing of the stroke to keep it front quadrant. And he was just really struggling, and he's quite tight through the shoulders as well. So mobility's sort of there too. But one of the things that you had this swimmer do to be able to keep that lead arm out in front for balance and support and to get a better catch was you actually had him slow down the hand at the back of the stroke through the exit, just to be able to keep pressure on the water and provide propulsion for him to be able to keep that lead arm there. Because one of the things you noticed was he was coming out a bit short, which was causing that hand to drop. And what are some of those other things in the stroke? Well, first of all, if you could talk sort of about that and how you noticed it, but what are some of those other things that are connected in the stroke as well that you tend to look at if there's certain faults or flaws in the stroke?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that there's all sorts of magic rhythmic sort of patterns in swimming. It's quite mathematical in some weird way, in an artistic way. There's everything's related through, and it's oftentimes in long axis strokes, freestyle and backstroke. It's related to the body roll. And so your roll from side to side is the engine that powers your stroke. But you can't get a good roll unless your kicking timing is correct, and the feet give you a little bit of pressure in order to push the hips and the shoulders and get that roll going. So you need purchase on your feet in order to get the body rolling. So the timing of the kick is incredibly linked, whether it's a 2-beat kick or a 6-beat kick, to that just roll from side to side with the hips and shoulders, and then the stroke is in sync with that as well. So there are little patterns, things like that. if you're looking at the front end of a stroke, also have a look at the back of the other arm stroke. You know, what's the finish of a stroke doing while the other stroke's catching? Because if you're not pushing back enough with one hand, then you're not getting that good push and glide that's reaching you into the next stroke with the other hand. So there's a real connection between the finish of one stroke and the catch of another. Was something that I really worked on a lot with backstroke. Backstroke's slightly different from freestyle. There's not a catch-up aspect to it at all. It's a very windmilly stroke. But you really need the seamless transition of push from one hand into the catch of the other. And that concept itself is very, very similar in freestyle, even though it's slightly different timing of where you're doing that. But those sort of things, the timing of the breathing, working with the roll of the shoulders and the rhythm of the kick, all of those sort of things, trying to get those timing patterns right. And oftentimes it's even more noticeable in strokes like butterfly and breaststroke. If you get the timing out in those strokes, the stroke can be very, very hard to do.
One of the things I've started to give a lot of our the online members who send their videos in for analysis is I'm tending to look a lot more at the feet, and if the timing's out and that connectedness with the kick and the rotation in the front end of the stroke, if it's not quite there, I've just been getting them to do some, like a lot of them, I'll give them 650s with a kickboard and a snorkel and building 1 to 3. So easy, medium, fast 50, do that twice through. And like, it doesn't need to be a lot if they're not doing anything at the moment, but just that pure kicking as part of their warm up and doing that across 4, 5, 6 weeks, I've seen a big difference just in the entire stroke once they have that more effective kick with that little bit of downwards and upwards pressure with the down and up beat. And and it's exactly right. It's for the swimmers where there's just no connectedness through the kick, it's very hard to get that front end working without it. And I think when I first probably started coaching triathletes, I had probably a bit less of a focus on it, because I was like, well, you don't need to be kicking hard for those longer distances. But the thing I was missing there was, well, yeah, you need an effective kick though, which means that it'll help you with the hip rotation and everything else. So it is certainly important, even though it's not necessarily going to provide a lot of propulsion. It will help with everything else. So it's something that I've started to look a lot more at. And I mean, for swimmers who struggle with kicking, like there are a lot of swimmers who can't go forwards when they're kicking, like their ankle inflexibility is really bad. I just get them to start out with fins on and get started that way, and then that will help to loosen up the ankles. You're probably best having some good fins, like some the DMC fins that we recommend, because if you're using maybe some of the Speedo fins, which can be very stiff and very heavy, then they can actually it's not great for your ankle flexibility. So some good fins, just kick with those first, and a kickboard and a snorkel, so you got your head down, and then you'll eventually get to the point where you can just take them off and move forwards. And it might be a very slow progression for people who it might be in your 50s, 60s, and so on, and you're very tight through the ankles, but you can get there, and it can make a world of difference once you do. Have you sort of seen that with a lot of swimmers who are in their 50s and 60s who have maybe come from a running background? And
absolutely, and I think there is a general, we'll try not to generalize too much, but there does seem to be a lack of wanting to kick as the adult, especially the sea swimmers, the triathletes. So it's interesting you say that. I get a lot of my squads, my adult fitness and triathlete ocean squads. They feel, you see them turn their noses up to doing kick sets.
Yeah.
And I can see on the surface that it's maybe not relevant, especially when you get a wetsuit on and so on. But it's just, I keep going back to the fact that it just makes you a better swimmer. It gives you core stability. If you kick timing is right, it helps the rotation, the power you get through the stroke and through the hips. There's some absolutely amazing world-class, world champion swimmers that have been two-beat kickers. You don't have to have a six-beat powerful sprint kick, but it's just the timing and the drive of those two-beat kicks is usually very good with a good swimmer. And so it is something that I think is very important. I think being able to kick with flippers, like you say, good flippers, being able to do different types of kicking, I think is very important, because just kicking on your front with a board generally puts you in a bad body position. It arches your back. It lets you bend your knees a bit too much. It focuses on a down kick more than an up kick. So I like to mix up the kicking. Do some on your back, especially on your side is very good because you've got even pressure both ways in the water. So you can feel an up and a down kick. And that drive coming from both directions of kick is really, really important for that drive, that purchase that you want to be working with the hips and the height of the hips and the roll of the hips. So that, that sort of thing I think is very important, just to mix it up and just look at it as an overall part of swimming. It's just a drill basically to try and help the rest of the stroke improve.
Yeah. And just to sort of finish up, as we're going through some of the sets at Hell Week, like we'd typically have like one more of a sort of training session in the day, and then one more skills and technique focused session. In the sessions where we're sort of working a bit harder and it was more of a training session, as you're working with some of those guys and girls in the slower lane, particularly like if you think of the DC special, which is the 40-50 set that we always finish up Hell Week with, where you basically the set is 16 50s where you go every fourth one fast, 12 50s where every third one is fast, 8 where every second is fast, and then the last 4 are all fast. What message did you have for the swimmers as they were going through that, in order for them to be able to maintain their pace in those fast ones throughout the whole set and keep their stroke together? Because I think in both weeks and across all of the lanes, like people really finished off well with that DC special set. What were some of the messages that you were giving to those swimmers to be able to sustain their pace?
A lot of times I was actually trying to hold them back because I knew the sort of the length of that set, what it was going to be for the level of the swimmers, and so a lot of times it was a bit about, hey, let's relax more now. Just stretch it out, work on your stroke on these easy ones and so on, just so that we could get the different paces of gears. But I think a lot of the swimmers, I was basically giving them times on every one that they were coming in, and I don't think a lot of those swimmers had that degree of sort of coming in and someone telling them exactly how the work that they've done equated to an improvement in time, and so that sometimes was just a really nice thing to have, is that knowledge of what your time pacing is. That was a great set. I really enjoyed working with the swimmers on that one.
It's quite, I know just from my own swimming, like it's quite motivating if you've got someone there giving you your times, and you don't need to look at your watch, you don't need to look at the stop clock. Like you're getting your times there, and all you need to focus in on is your output and your effort. And especially for, probably I'd say half the swimmers at each of the camps there probably don't get that on a regular basis, just in the squads. So they're not exactly sure what the effort required is for the times. And yeah, in terms of holding back at the start of let's say a 2K main set like that, you've really got to hold back, because it's pretty easy to burn all of your matches at the start in the first sort of 10 to 15 50s, if you are going completely all out in those fast ones. So you're right, a lot of it is about knowing how to pace it and how to just take it easy at the start, because it doesn't usually take a lot of extra effort to increase the speed. It means you just hold that good technique, add in a little bit more effort, but you can see a pretty good result, a couple seconds per 50 faster by doing that. But you can easily go from, say, like your easy ones might be a 5 out of 10 and your fast ones might be an 8 out of 10. But it's pretty easy to go to like a 10 out of 10 and maybe only go half a second faster for that 50, but you've burnt your matches early on, whereas all you want to do is just sit at that 8 out of 10 instead. And I think that's what can be a real skill to learn to do. But the more often you do those types of sets, the better you get at it, and that really transfers into your ability to hold a good pace in the races that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes that 8 out of 10 in effort would be the 10 out of 10 in time without them realizing it. You'd get the fastest time on the ones that were just being worked on efficiently and like you say, at about an 8th level. And so, you would often see swimmers as they tried harder, perhaps create more drag by thrashing or so on.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that can be good about good about camps is like the environment is everyone's generally pretty relaxed. Maybe at the start, like everyone's sort of figuring it out first day, so they're not as relaxed. But as they go through it, like people are in a good headspace. We do those breathing exercises. They're in paradise. The weather's good, sunny. Everyone's just in that headspace where they're not trying to force things, and that's what I notice. Like I guess at a camp compared to maybe like a squad, is that people are just in that sort of environment. People can change a lot easier and a lot quicker when they come from that place of calmness, of relaxation, and not trying to overdo things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you saw people settle in as the week went on. It was just such a beautiful environment with all the trees around and all the water. But, like we were talking about earlier, I think, from my point of view, having that sharing ability with all four of us coaches, it's quite novel because, coming from a high performance background, the coaches might talk to each other about concepts, but the high performance swimmers or the coaches were often very possessive about their swimmers, and they didn't want other coaches working with them. So it was all about the relationship between that coach and that swimmer, and you see that a lot in high performance swimming. So it's so refreshing to have those different opinions being all dished out. Four different coaches giving concepts, but again, they're not different concepts. They're all pretty much on the same wavelength that we were working with, because we're talking so much out of the pool about our coaching concepts with each other, that we're all sort of learning from each other at the same time. So it is just a really novel thing, I think, especially from my background as a coach.
Yeah, and it's good to be a part of that. Like it's like for me, I really thoroughly enjoyed the camps in Thailand, because it's it's a good group of coaches. Everyone's all the swimmers are just they're there because they want to improve, but they're also there to have a holiday, to be able to relax and just enjoy being over there. And next year, so we're coaching it at Noosa, Hawaii, and Thailand. So if you're listening and you want to work with myself and Garry, all of those camps are on our website, so you can check out the details there. But basically got Noosa in March and May, Hawaii in July, and then the Thailand camps in October. So really looking forward to those and having you back on. Having you back there on deck, it's going to be a lot of fun, and as you said, it's probably a slightly different environment to what you're used to. Like it's, we train hard and we put a lot into it, but I really love the relaxed environment that we can have at each of these places, and the fact that we get to go to such beautiful destinations. It's I really love it, and that's why I've got 7 camps going next year, where it was 3 this year. I just thought, this is what I really enjoy, so I want to just do more of them. Which of the camps you're looking forward to the most?
Oh gosh, honestly, I really, like you, I enjoy them all. I haven't done Noosa yet, so I'm not sure what that's like. I am looking forward to that because I've never been to Noosa, which is a strange thing. And I think, it's almost transplanting, isn't it? Hawaii was quite similar to me to Thailand in content of what we were delivering. Maybe, there was a bit more work in Hell Week than in Hawaii, but in general, it was really the focus on technique and working with the swimmers and trying to find the challenges involved with helping people to improve their stroke. So, I look forward to that no matter where that is. I don't know if I have a favourite yet.
Yeah, no,
I'll let you know next year.
I'm looking forward to it. Well, thanks for joining me on the podcast, and we will catch up in March. And really looking forward to that first camp in Noosa.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on the podcast again. I'll look forward to it in the future.
Thanks for listening to the Effortless Swimming Podcast. If you'd like us to help you become a faster, more efficient swimmer, go to www.effortlessswimming.com.